This story will cover from then to now and next, all about change, how to turn losers into winners. Have you thought much about the nature of shopping, where all that stuff comes from? More and more these days we are connected, whether it's flowers from Africa or cattle food from South America. Take the humble hamburger, for example. An international favourite, often with mustard and ketchup, another link in the food chain. Mighty McDonald's were challenged in the longest case in English legal history, between that huge American corporation and an impoverished couple. We're talking about big food, and the nature of it, and not just McDonald's. The ups and downs, from then to now. Famously said, first they ignore you, then they ridicule you, then they fight you, and then you win. Here's the problem.
Here come two animals that have shaped the surface of our planet more than any other: cattle and goats, plus us. They, like sheep, are vegetarian. We are omnivores, and we like meat, lamb or pork. But why stop with just those four favorites: cow, goat, sheep, pig? In fact, the French favor horse. Why not? People farm deer, enjoy venison. And then there's bison, low in cholesterol, sort of wild cow. Red Indians liked them. Eskimos enjoyed seal, a steak from the sea, whereas the Japanese might prefer dolphin or whale. And not every country agrees about that. A kangaroo on the barbie in Australia, or a tasty bit of bush meat in West Africa, in this case monkey, chimp, even gorilla with pangolin on the side. Or with fruit on the side, how about a bit of fruit bat? It takes all tastes. All these mammals are deemed edible around the world. Bear paws may be a popular delicacy in the Far East. Here in Sweden, they're favored by the bear to eat its steak. Like us, they're omnivores. They like meat when they can get it. And cattle are the favorite worldwide. And they, with us, have changed the face of the planet. The prairies of North America have paid a massive price for yielding beef. Not only the bison were destroyed by the settlers, but also millions of acres of natural grassland, and their occupants were effectively slaughtered, like the badger and the swift fox, a symbol of the wild. Now, most of us see cattle, man's bison, as the symbol of the wild prairie, reinforced by cigarette advertisements and a whole culture of Western movies. More cowboys, fewer Indians. Progress, as the plough, changed the world here. Out went the diversity of prairie dogs, and deer, and many other species of animals and plants. In came monocultures of crops, especially grown to feed the increasing herds of cattle. And that was pretty much the end of a diverse landscape. Next to go, heading south from North America, was Central America. Tropical, so even more biodiverse, with brilliant creatures like scarlet macaws, symbolic of the jungle. And plants, that crucial food base which we ignore or mismanage at our peril. The rainforest is a cornucopia of potential foods and medicines. They're pollinated by a myriad of insects, from social bees to individual butterflies. From dazzling hummingbirds, like the snowcap, needing water for a bath, Plants clothe the hillsides, preventing erosion. They hold and release water like a sponge. Lizards walk on it. It's a miraculous community in its beauty and variety. But when this species suddenly enters this world, tested and honed for millions of years, the effect is devastating. Innocent, placid, cows graze contentedly in a pretty tropical scene in Costa Rica, Central America. They're originally from another continent, and the grass from Africa. And it's the same now in Brazil. Here in South America, cattle are completing their domination of the 3 American continents. The men behind these dramatic changes have a job to do, and we'll follow one of them, Paulo, on his rounds to see the real cost of beef.
McDonald's legal team for that famous court case cost £10 million. Their annual advertising budget, $2 billion. That's big stuff, big business. But what about the source?
Brasilia is the capital of Brazil, a modern city with modern businesses. It was designed and carved out of the wilderness, and its influence now reaches far and wide across the enormity of Brazil. But there are still huge gaps between the lifestyles in the city and out on the cattle ranch.
Okay? Yeah.
The intensification of beef farming is now worldwide. The risks, apparent in Europe, come from increased specialization and the use of more and more efficient methods. Cost is the bottom line, and if the system breaks down, that cost may be paid in human lives. The basics: water, grass, and cattle. It comes down to that. On his essential mobile phone, Paulo discusses costs and prices with head office in Brasilia. He's dealing with a commodity, a product whose value is measured on the stock markets of the world. They're money markets of livestock.
Vou dar uma estudada, vou até trocar uma ideia depois. E aí, antes de qualquer coisa, eu te ligo no teu celular. Falou?
The Amazon, with the world's greatest rainforest. Much is still unexplored. Thousands of species will be discovered there, if the place remains the same. The locals know of special properties in plants and animals. We don't. Below this man is a world he's probably never seen, and nor have we until now. And it's getting late. Turtles and their eggs could be harvested sustainably. Fish, of thousands of species in the Amazon, could be fished with care forever. From the bottom of the river to the top, up past the tree trunks of the flooded forest, there's a huge variety with huge potential. The trees themselves are, of course, a renewable resource for building boats and houses, or for export as timber on a global scale. Catfish, the red-tailed, one of many species in the Amazon. large and small, herbivores, carnivores, predators and prey. It's a jungle down here in the Jungle River. The mata mata is just one weird reptile amongst hundreds of others. Not a snake or an eel, but an amphibian related to the frogs and toads. This is an eel, an electric one. Almost blind, it navigates by sonar and shocks its prey to death. So as we move up the animal kingdom from fishes to amphibians to reptiles, and from the Amazon's floor to its ceiling, we glimpse its extraordinary diversity. This is the very opposite of any monoculture that is controlled, limited, enforced, manipulated. Nature in the Amazon, both underwater and in the rainforest above, is a flamboyant expression of experiment, expansion, diversification, freedom to vary. Up from the riverbank, through a tangle of many, many plant species, to the next evolutionary step from the reptiles, like turtles, the birds. There are many species of parrots in Brazil, such a popular kind of bird, the kind you wouldn't want to harm. This conversation could affect the price of a hamburger in Brasilia or New York. The meat is usually brought into centers, mixed up, and then distributed from there. So it's difficult to connect the exact cow with the burger it ends up in. But it's that connection, once called infamously the hamburger connection, that has created this landscape. When we eat a burger or a steak, we may be cutting down a tree on the other side of the world and killing a parrot in the process. It's a multi-billion-dollar business now. The cowboys still ride the range, but their guns are now replaced by mobile phones, and it's he who's quickest on the deal that wins.
So this is where it ends up. A man in a threesome, part of a test to see how good or bad this food is for your health. And football is included, but it's good for publicity and sells a lot of drinks and hamburgers.
Native dishes survive, but it seems cola, chips, steaks, hamburgers and ketchup are internationally welcomed. Mankind just likes them, with a bit of encouragement from marketing. Paulo enjoys his lunch. Of what was once mouthfuls of grass, which was once a forest with not just one four-legged species, but thousands of all sorts of all sorts. You can't blame the cows, and you can hardly blame the farmer or the businessman or the consumer. On the face of it, it looks rather harmless. But the cost of that introduced aggressive grass and the results of clearing the protective cover are ultimately destroying the soil. Means this ecology, that of the cattle trade, may be short-sighted. Nature's view, if it can have one, is of long-term productivity. Its communities adapt and adjust. Along the banks of the Amazon, where we left off, the tapir and the vulture cooperate with the capybara, that giant guinea pig, and vultures clean up. Tapirs and capybaras don't overgraze their home, they fertilize the river, and that benefits the fish, which the turtle may eat, and so might man, and so on. The birds feed on fish too, catching them in different ways, avoiding competition between species. They preen, restoring every single strand to its proper place, using oil from the gland at the base of their scarlet tail, colored by the shrimps the ibis eats. It's taken a long, long time to reach this kind of perfection. Giant water lily, tiny teal. Away from the river now to other worlds. Armadillos on the forest floor. Wild cats. Wild pigs, or peccaries. Both cat and pigs a reminder of the source of our familiar friends. Or foods. Curassows, pheasant-like, even chicken-like, another jungle resource, and all of them depend on water and plants in communities and detail that nature has selected, through the natural selection that Darwin spotted. But he missed this. Since his time, the size of the impacts and the speed of the changes have rocked the planet. We now communicate amazingly. With chemicals and machines, we can totally alter communities of plants and animals. We will do this if we want that beef at the right price. So our demands for a hamburger is the key to this landscape. It's all down to those little white tasty dots in a sea of green.
Good news for business, but probably bad news for the health of the customers.
Modern young Brazilians don't live in the jungle. They visit supermarkets and shopping malls, as they do in the States. They enjoy the same fast food. And it's not just the rivers and the forests that have been altered. The original grassland areas have been modified by farming, fenced, and in some cases protected for nature. Trees are still there. A plover has adapted to this other landscape. And so has a rhea, kind of South American ostrich, flightless, grass-loving. They've both taken advantage of man's fields, food and protection. With a water supply laid on too. Friendly neighbours, only here for the meat. Those trees that are not cut down hold yet another world of riches. The canopy of the forest is bathed in sunshine, watered by the rain, and breathed on by the warm breeze. Ideal for life to proliferate in this tangle in the sky. Green snakes in green leaves. Also hiding tree frogs. From tree snakes that resemble twigs. Watching carefully, maybe 80 feet up, and climbing. An iguana, a living dinosaur. Ancient creatures, ancient rituals, ancient place, Jurassic jungle. And as the climax of our journey, from fishes on the river bottom to the surface, from river shore to forest floor, to the roof of the jungle, the canopy, consider the climactic group in evolution, the primates, which include the tamarins and marmosets. Diversity in the extreme. But some of that diversity is in extreme danger. Here at Sao Paulo Zoo in Brazil, the black lion tamarin may just be saved from extinction by captive breeding. It almost disappeared as its forest home was felled for farming. But it's back in business thanks to a major effort by its primate cousins, humans, or at least some of them. Others, as a job in their mobile office, work in the opposite direction. Paulo's day out on his rounds brings him to the biggest place of change of all, the Cerrado. Grassland and small trees used to stretch for thousands and thousands of square miles over central Brazil. A Serengeti in South America, not East Africa. Though the rainforest is usually considered the main habitat under threat from controversial hamburger connections, the Cerrado is probably more serious. It's certainly different, and it often gets burnt. This may be part of the natural cycle, through lightning, or done to clear the land for the newcomers. Tough, planted grass or bare soil may replace natural savanna that includes herbs and flowers, plus scattered woodland. It's a remarkable community, and even on the cleared areas, there are signs of it. Ants and termites are a key. Giant anteaters can adapt if their food is there, but ranchers may not tolerate them. Or the little grison, though it may help control rats. The delicate maned wolf eats insects and mice, but the wolf name doesn't help. They get shot, trapped, and poisoned by cattlemen. The Seriema, another stalker and walker of the plains, is hunted too. And fewer of them survive to nest in the cerrado trees. They're cleared for cattle or cattle food crops. The plants here form a special community quite different from the rainforest. Some species may occur in both, like monkeys and king vultures. Others, like the tinamou, are more restricted to the cerrado, the kingdom of the ants and termites.
Moving on with our Brazilian product, that's soya fed, this is what happened when they reduced smashing the rainforest. They moved on to the cerrado, with chemicals, heavy equipment, backed by human greed.
This version of it is no use to any wildlife at all, just perhaps a lonely burrowing owl. The cerrado's become an empty desert, cleared and due to be planted with one species and one only. Soya for cattle, maybe even to be exported to Europe to feed cattle there. The power base, the driving force, is back in Brasilia. Consumers flock here and consume. Like the cattle industry moved south from North America through Central America to South America, so did tastes and demands. They wear trainers and jeans, international uniform. Or Swiss watches and expensive dresses. They eat expensive steaks or cheap hamburgers. Paulo returns after checking out his beef supply. Like more and more busy Brazilians on the move, he values a quick meal. And so does the burrowing owl. More of a fly-through than a drive-through. Adaptable, even to empty soybean fields, he can also live in town and hunt for insects and mice here around the Brasilia University campus. Jim Ratter and his team have just driven back from a trip to the Cerrado, the natural home of the owl. They're botanists from Edinburgh University in Scotland. They've been researching the plants there for many years. It's timely now, as there is a vast scheme to create a waterway linking rivers and canals almost the length of South America. Huge barges will carry soya to the world. And of course, it's controversial. At the other end of the scale, the Cerrado, if it survives, can produce its own native plants. Not soya, but local fruits and flowers, like ones these botanists are working on so urgently. One can, of course, eat soya directly and not go via beef. But people really like the taste of beef in its many forms, and big business in Brasilia will continue to push for more production across the forest and the Cerrado. It's international and profitable, but recently things have changed. As beef and other meat products have moved around the world, there have been concerns about food safety. BSE, foot and mouth, have scared consumers, particularly in Europe. Business is affected. What is the knock-on with the consumer?
McDonald's changed their menus, more healthy they said, and profits increased. But what about the environment?
Companies say they'd like to protect the environment and its wildlife, perhaps even ants, that key element in the Cerrado. Leafcutters are tiny reminders of the complexity of ecosystems, be it in the Amazon River, the rainforest, or the Cerrado savanna. And the food chains don't end there. There are many more in many other countries where cattle and grasses have been introduced. Leaving Brazil and South America, we head back north through cattle history to see how the impact on nature might be reduced. Here in Costa Rica in Central America, the forest has suffered greatly in the past. The hamburger connection brought bad publicity to a country that prides itself as very green, a pioneer in ecotourism. Much forest was felled to make way for the craze for cheap beef. And despite its protected areas, for example on unfarmable volcano slopes, the lowlands went the usual way. Introduced grasses and hungry cattle that prevent the regrowth of anything that was there before. They create and maintain an ocean of sameness as far as the rancher's eye can see. Cattle and cattlemen marched across Costa Rica and transformed it. The Brahmin bull at the stud farm became a symbol of progress and prosperity. These animals were, shall we say, attentive, and the population soared. Environmentalists were not listened to. Beef businessmen from abroad were. Exports rose, the forests fell, and the cattle grazed on and on. Into Costa Rican modern culture, the national flag merged with other signs of success.
The story of the burger business is upwards mainly, but it's zero diversity against wonderful biodiversity.
But nature can be resilient. If something is left behind, like a tree or two, a patch of bush or a little pond, there's a surviving reservoir of life. For shade, a tree may be spared by the rancher. Fences partition the place. Cattle are restrained by sticks on their necks. They can't get through. But in this partly wild landscape, it seems cattle and wildlife can mix. The ecological cost of a hamburger is reduced. The wildlife value is increased. And that, in a potentially risky cattle market, as food safety and human health risks threaten the business, could prove to be a good investment, at least here in Costa Rica. Maybe even back in Brazil, that land of great biodiversity. These unfarmable wild slopes here in Costa Rica shelter animals that tourists want to see. Whether it be monkeys, toucans, scarlet macaws, that symbol of the tropical forest, or birds of prey, These creatures effectively are worth cash. But of course, they'll only survive if their home does. Every landscape has its symbol or symbols. In the tropical jungle, the scarlet macaw. On the prairies, the bison. Or perhaps much more at risk now, this little creature being helped by a remarkable Englishwoman, Cleo Smeaton. Here in Canada, on a rare piece of wild prairie, she releases captive-bred swift foxes into a prairie dog town. Both prairie dogs and swift foxes have been poisoned, hunted, and driven out by the cattle business. Foxes need prairie dogs. Indeed, they need a whole ecosystem which has largely disappeared in the name of beef or food for cattle, like maize or wheat. Monocultures like this, sprayed against pests and weeds, are effectively sterile. But that's modern farming. Whole communities depend upon it, and the price of the product is crucial. No grasshoppers for foxes. No room for prairie dogs that are seen as competitors for grass, and whose burrows are said to cause accidents for cattle. No room for badgers. No room for rattlesnakes that lurk in burrows and help control rats and mice, quite a problem on a corn farm. This is how it used to be on the prairie, when lots of swift foxes thrived on lots of prairie dogs, before the bison were slaughtered in their millions and replaced by the cattle industry. Thanks to Cleo Smeaton's efforts, and others, and changing attitudes, swift foxes may be making a comeback on the small areas of wild prairie that survive. But they're still up against enormous odds. A whole culture and many skills want to maintain the cattle business as it is, or expand it even more. The cowboy is simply a link in a relentless food chain, from consumers to the place it comes from. You could say that's the real price of a hamburger here, the swift fox. And in the jungles of Central America, scarlet macaws, orchids and iguanas. In the rivers and forests of South America, fish and turtles. On the Cerrado savannas, maned wolves and giant anteaters. That's a lot to pay for your beef. the patterns of change. Globally, from a satellite view, we can see how cattle and farming have changed the face of the planet. In this case, the state of Rondônia in Brazil. These strangers to the land have destroyed its surface as the locals never would, and the pattern has been repeated around the world. Globalized agriculture treats food commodities like processed steel. As their numbers intensify, so does the way cattle are farmed. Animals and their products are moved globally now. It's a massive international industry. The cattle themselves, the food they need, the food we buy. And with these changes, driven by the supermarket's demand for and control of cheap food, has come disease, and the true cost of fixing it has yet to surface.
Our meal, our story, has come to an end. And isn't that how we started, with shopping, with the real cost to be revealed? Scientific research, with over 180,000 species in the Cerrado, but cleared areas for soya as cattle food and much more. 1. Soya. Just one species. That's all.